engineering. However, today's talk has nothing to do with traffic engineering. It's actually about Wikipedia, because Axel happens to be one of the 4 editorial administrators of Wikipedia in New Zealand. And actually, talking about organisations that he's active in, he's offering a new group, which is the history of Golden Bay and putting things on Wikipedia. However, I'll let him talk about that, and I haven't said anything uncomplimentary, Axel.
Thanks, Jenny. Jenny's been, I've got a microphone, thanks. Jenny's been threatening me with talking about the naughty things that I'm up to if I don't behave, so she's been Dear Jenny for the last few days. So I'm trying to give you an impression what Collingwood was like leading up to 1864. And in the second part I'm discussing the situation in the colony and what the seat of government commissioners were up to. And after assessing all the facts, I then superimpose my own impressions and give you my conclusions. So the talk ended up being a bit long because, yeah, you know how it goes. And I moved 3 slides covering the first capital of New Zealand until after the end. And if you're still keen when I've come to the end, say so if you want to hear about the first capital of New Zealand. But anyway, it is 1864 and New Zealand's capital is in Auckland. How come that Collingwood was under consideration at that time to become New Zealand's capital? So the situation in the country that we had, the political situation, we had Parliament with an elected lower house and an appointed upper house. There were 9 provincial councils in 1864, and as far as people were concerned, what the provincial councils did had far more impact on their day-to-day life than what came from Parliament in Auckland, and therefore they paid a lot more attention to provincial council elections than to parliamentary elections. So in 1864 the House of Representatives had 57 members, and during that term of Parliament the number of legislative councillors, that's the members of the upper house, increased from 21 to 35. There was a lot of dissatisfaction by South Island members of Parliament due to the long distance of travel to Auckland. So for example, in 1854, the very first session of Parliament, it took the Otago members a full 2 months to get to Auckland due to storms, poor shipping connections. They were not happy. And there was also quite a bit of dissatisfaction with the parliamentary building. In fact, it was the parliamentarians called it the edifice. So that's a portmanteau made up of the word shed and edifice, so the latter meaning a massive structure. And Henry Sewell, who became the first premier, he frequently wrote letters that he sent back home, and he had stipulated that these letters would not be published until long after he's dead. And so his 2 books are absolute pleasure to read, because he was not holding back. He was saying things the way he saw it. Very entertaining book. So he says about the edifice: the room of moderate size, plain, and with no architectural pretension whatsoever. The whole building is of the most undecorated style, a great wooden barn-shaped affair which might serve for a hospital, a jail, or a barrack, or if gutted, be turned into a Methodist meeting house. Very incommodiously arranged, and the first thing we have to do is to turn it, all the interior arrangement, topsy-turvy. So that was what the parliamentarians thought of this. Parliament, it all came into being in a real hurry, and the Parliament building was built over 4 months, and it was just finished when the first session started in 1854. So there were immediate grumbles about Auckland being the capital, and so in the very first session it came up, let's move the Parliament and the seat of government somewhere south. Didn't go anywhere. In 1856, the then Governor Thomas Gore Brown decided that the next year the session would be held in Wellington, but the Parliament then didn't approve the budget for that, so it didn't happen. In the summer of 57-58, Wellington did something quite clever. They built themselves new provincial council buildings, and the buildings were quite stately. And they were laid out so that they could accommodate both houses of Parliament plus some government officials if Parliament were to move down to Wellington. So very clever. 1860, Parliament resolved to meet in Wellington, but then the First Taranaki War started and the decision was reversed. 1862, we did have a parliamentary session in Wellington that year. It was a one-off, and tragedy hit. The White Swan that was hired to get a lot of government officials down to Wellington, plus all the parliamentary papers, foundered in a storm. Nobody died, but most of the parliamentary papers were lost, and for many years to come, future civil servants used the shipwreck as an excuse if they could not find relevant papers. But in late 63, Parliament finally decided to appoint commissioners who would decide where the future seat of Parliament was going to be. And so basically the brief was for them to decide on a seat of government somewhere in Cook Strait. And Aucklanders certainly were deeply unhappy about this, and so I've got a little snipping here from the Lyttelton Times at the time, which gives you a flavour of how the feelings were. The seat of government commissioners arrived in Wellington on Sunday last. They had previously been in Auckland, where their arrival and departure stirred up the journals to a bitterness of expression, which is the best evidence of fright. The Wellington people, to judge in the same way by the newspapers, look on the three gentlemen as the inhabitants of Lystra did on Paul and Barnabas, and are hardly restrained from doing sacrifice to them. So this Bible story, if you are not religious, refers to Paul the Apostle and Barnabas, who healed the lame Timothy, and the people of Lystra offered sacrifices to the healers. So that's the Lyttelton Times for you. Excuse me. The then ministry, that is the government, was led by Frederick Whittaker, who was an Aucklander, and as such, personally, he was deeply opposed to Parliament moving south. Others in the ministry were William Fox, who resided in Rangitiki and had previously been in Wellington, so he was definitely a proponent of the shift. Rita Wood was one of the Auckland MPs. Thomas Gillies had a background in rural Southland, but at the time was living in Dunedin, and Thomas Russell was another Auckland MP. And so governments or ministries at the time were not formed along party lines. In fact, parties did not exist until 1893. Instead, each ministry had to be formed by individual MPs or members of the Legislative Council, they weren't stable as things like party discipline did not exist. So therefore, as a ministry, they could not take a position on the capital question, as it would most definitely have split them up. So they instructed the governor, George Grey, to engage 3 commissioners. These instructions were issued in early December 1863. With that was a budget allocation of £50,000, which converted to today's money is 18.4 million New Zealand dollars. And it was also stipulated that the commissioners would be paid 5 guineas per day per commissioner, and in case guineas is not something that you know, that's 21 shillings. So when you convert that, that was a daily payment of $2,000.
A day?
Yeah. And when Jenny mentioned, you know, I'm a transport engineer. If I charge myself out, I don't come for $2,000 a day. You pay more than that. So it's in the big scheme of things, it's sits about right. I'd say. Anyway, so there was a bit of argy-bargy between the ministry and Grey. Grey was an interesting fellow to work with anyway. But anyway, they sorted it out, and Grey wrote to the governors of New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania, and asked them to each decide on one commissioner to sort this out for New Zealand, where the capital should go, somewhere on the shores of Cook Strait. And Auckland Council also wrote to those 3 Australian governors, questioning the merits of the process and complaining bitterly, you know, they weren't really listened to. But even some Otago people, politicians, complained because Cook Strait was too far away from Otago, they thought. So anyway, those Australian governors, they eventually all made their individual decisions, and in Victoria, Sir Francis Murphy was appointed. He was originally a colonial surgeon in Sydney before becoming a successful farmer and then a member of the Legislative Assembly in Victoria. He was the first Speaker of Victoria's Legislative Assembly from 1856 until many years after being a commissioner here. Murphy was even reasonably well known in New Zealand, so he had quite a high profile. So the second one from New South Wales, the Honourable Joseph Docker, he was a surgeon, and became a member of the New South Wales Legislative Council. After he had been a commissioner, he held many high-ranking ministerial portfolios. And Gunn from Tasmania, he was initially a prison overseer and a police magistrate in the years prior to serving as a member of each of Tasmania's Houses of Parliament. So he was both in the lower and upper house. He became a respected botanist and was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in London in 1854. So, but let's have a look at Collingwood. And the story of early Collingwood is quite dominated by William Gibbs, and he was a rather wealthy landowner, and he bought the Aorere Peninsula, as it was known, 40 acres, from Maori living at Aorere Pa. He bought that land in 1854, and the point of him buying this land was to do farming there, and he soon found out he bought a lemon. The soil was poor. On the flat land there was water standing everywhere, was brackish, and nothing grew. And so after 2 years he thought, bugger this. He tried to sell up. He advertised this land, his 40 acres, for £40 and got exactly 0 offers. Wasn't happy. The township that developed there was known as Gippstown, and is still sometimes called that. And the flat area especially, so the commercial part of Gippstown, was often referred to as Gipp's Flat. And Gibbs in about 1856 bought a land at Downard-Wilke, and he did move there in 1856, so there are several sources that confirm that. And so the Gibbs family, they planted the avenue of plane trees in Downard-Wilke in 1865, so that avenue is still there, so that is William Gibbs's family's work. So here's a painting showing Collingwood in January 1864. So on the extreme left you can see the Aureri Pa sitting on quite a prominent sand hill there. Gibbs Wharf you can see in the middle, so that's I'll show you an even better view of that. And there was a second wharf, and that was the provincial wharf, basically Nelson Province. They had their own wharf there. It's just out of the view, and it's a little bit upstream from where the wharf is these days, or the wharf remains rather. And so here's a different view of Collingwood. You can see Gibbs Wharf there much more clearly. It was built for Gibbs in the winter of 1857 and extended about 50 meters from the end of William Street. So gold was found a bit inland in July 1856. The guys who found a few specks that were glittering, tiny, was John Ellis and Edward or Ned James, and they weren't really sure whether it was even gold. You know, it was very fine, and one of them went back a couple of months later and had more of a poke and more of this glittery stuff, and they weren't sure. And so next time they were in Nelson, they asked around whether somebody could give them some advice, and so they came across William Lightband, and Lightband came over with them Christmas 1856 and had a couple of helpers with him, and so the Lightband party, they so the original gold was found where Lightband Gully and flows into Eppos Creek, and so Lightband went a little bit up what then became Lightband's Gully, and that's where they found payable gold in the first week of 1857. And so Lightband was asked to help because he had been to the Victorian gold rush from 51 to 53, and so he is commemorated, or Lightband's Gully is, with this monument, and the inscription reads, 2 miles west of this spot at Lightband's Gully, the first South Island discovery of payable gold was made in 1856. So a question, who knows where this monument is located? Okay, yes? A lay-by? Okay, anybody else?
That lies on Vic Easton's driveway.
Exactly, that's the one. And the reason that used to be the highway, where that went over the ridge there, that's where the monument is. So it's still actually legal road. You know, it looks like Vic and Liza's driveway, but it's still legal road, and so you can go to that monument there. So the highway was shifted when they built the causeway across the inlet in the early 1960s. So, but anyway, back to the gold rush. It really started to kick off when William Lightband's father brought some of the gold that the party had found back to Nelson. and it was displayed in a shop window in Trafalgar Street, and then a few days later the gold was auctioned off for £3.18 per ounce, and all hell broke loose and people just flocked across the bay, came from Nelson, and other miners who came from Takaka or Motueka. Sorry?
It's gone off.
It's gone off. Apparently it does that. Here we go. Thank you. So other miners who came across from Takaka or Motueka, after crossing the Parapara Inlet, some of them walked across the spur directly to the gold field without even coming through Gibbstown first. And and Mr. Gibbs himself, he felt rather lucky that the land didn't sell a year earlier. So instead, at this point in time, he decided, I get my land subdivided. And so he engaged John Beauchamp and Henry Lewis to do this. So Beauchamp was an architect, a surveyor and a civil engineer from Nelson, and Lewis was his business partner. And so the streets were named possibly after William Gibbs and his wife Betsy. However, they also had children with the names William and Elizabeth. One of their sons was George, and here's a George Street, but that has been renamed and is these days Swiftsure Street. And then Henry Lewis, one of the surveyors, he is commemorated by Lewis Street. So here you see, this was the outline of the land that William Gibbs couldn't sell for £40 in 1856, and it was suddenly worth £25,000. So commercial sections in Gibbs Flat sold for between £2 and £8 per foot of street frontage.
Per foot?
Per foot. Yeah, this thing.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so quite something. And so, but what this map also shows is, with a dashed line, is the outline of where the shoreline is these days. So you can see that our Rary Pa stuck out a lot further into the channel than what there is now, and so it's all eroded away. And certainly the sand dunes the Pa sat on top of, that's all gone. So the Nelson Provincial Council, their job was to, amongst many other things, is to issue liquor licenses. And in a 3-week period in March and April 1857, they issued no fewer than 10 liquor licenses. So they weren't all for Gibbstown itself. Some were for establishments on the goldfields. And many of these premises were just tents, so don't expect anything too fabulous. And so by late 1857, the best of those hotels was the commercial, so it's said. And Mike Johnston, in his book Our Rary Gold, has a little section on that. He says, Dr. John Shore, a notable British travel writer who made a fleeting visit to the diggings later in the year, has left this description of the hotel, which he was assured was the best in Gibbstown. The hotel comprised a wooden skeleton, merely covered with a coarse canvas or calico, bereft of all windows and with only one door, so constructed as to let in from its numerous crevices light, heat, and the sun, with a dirt floor. On entering, Shaw was immediately aware that everything was useful, entirely bereft of the ornamental. A large wooden table set off by wooden benches constituted the dining room, which was also cramped with all sorts of goods and tools, whether piled in the corners, along with vegetables or suspended from the ceiling. Nearby, a large sign advised that all meals had to be paid for before leaving the table, only partly concealed by a low partition was the kitchen with a large chimney, substituting for a wall a sheet of canvas separated off the bedroom, a single room with 2 tiers of bunks that offered repose to up to a dozen men, as well as providing further storage for picks, shovels and other items useful on the diggings. Despite its proletarian appearance, a sign prohibited smoking in the bedroom, but dogs were allowed on the premises. So there you go. And the flag, by the way, is that was the flag that William Lightband displayed on his tent. So early on during the diggings, the miners thought we need to have some rules, and it was decided that William Lightband is the right person to come up with some rules, and he did, and that was accepted. And so to mark the status, the women of Nelson sewed this flag, and that flag is today in Nelson Cathedral. So then the provincial council looked at the situation and thought, gosh, this is going to turn into a real town. And so they proclaimed it a town, and added and said, well, our crown land will have a town there on the terraces overlooking Gippstown. And so they named that Collingwood after Cuthbert Collingwood. He was Rear Admiral in 1805 and was raised to the peerage after the Battle of Trafalgar as Baron Collingwood. And so there is a widely held belief that the survey was done in England. Rubbish. It was done by Thomas Brunner. He of ornithological fame these days, in 1857 in a bit of a hurry on behalf of the provincial council. And so this is the survey that Brunner did, and what I've done is I have superimposed some streets onto it. So State Highway 60 makes use of one of the streets, at least in the close to the coast. Then we have Collingwood Quay and Haven Road, went along the waterfront there. Lewis Street going up the hill towards Collingwood area school, and Washington Street were already surveyed as part of the Gibbs survey. So was Washington Street, and the other 2 streets that are these days in existence are Ryan Street and Excellent Street. And the rest basically didn't happen. So the Collingwood-Bainham main road is somewhere completely different from what the survey envisaged, and so is the Collingwood-Puponga main road. So there you go. Then we had the gold rush happened. It peaked in 58. There's different reports how many miners might have been there during the peak. One report says 2,500, other reports say 4,000. But by the end of 59, we were left with about 200 miners, and Gippstown went into some serious decline. And both wharves had significantly deteriorated by 1863 with big holes in them. The deck had rotten, and it was dangerous to use, not just at night. And despite the locals all preferring the Gibbs wharf because that was located right in town, and rather than the provincial wharf at the custom house, which was out of the way, the provincial council put some money forward to have the provincial wharf restored. So the photo is from 65. At the diggings, at the boots, the Devil's Boots, the route to the diggings. The photo was taken by William Travers, a lawyer, politician, explorer, naturalist, and he actually owned most of Parapara beyond where I live in the valley there at the time. So the local government at the time that we had was basically the provincial council. They were in sole charge until 62. And in October 62, because the Golden Bay locals had lobbied, they got given road boards, and they came in existence in October 62. And so they meant built roads and tracks and maintained existing ones, and they received some funding from the as provincial grants and had the ability to collect local rates. And the public first voted for the route boards in July 1863. So, but let us quickly go back to the commissioners and their time in New Zealand. You know, despite communication at the time being incredibly difficult, so a letter had to go by a ship. They all managed to get themselves onto the same boat and got into Auckland in late July 1864, where they would have met with Sir George Grey, the governor, but there is zero reporting on that. They spent quite a few days visiting the Waikato, which is maybe surprising because what's that got to do with the New Zealand capital? But the long stay in Auckland is explained by there simply wasn't a ship going from Auckland to Wellington any sooner than on 3 August. So when they left for Wellington, and travelling with them was Frederick Eaton. He was from the Colonial Defence Office and had been assigned to them as their secretary, and he was paid a guinea a day. And here's something from the New Zealander, which was an Auckland newspaper from 1845 to 1866. And so you can sense from that the Auckland feelings on the matter. We tremble for the effects on the Wellingtonian mind of the discovery that all these fond visions are illusory, and that the commissioners are about to be exposed to the seductions of Auckland before visiting the city of earthquakes. So, and with that they were referring to the 1855 Wairarapa earthquake, which to this day is the strongest earthquake recorded during European times in New Zealand. So we got to Wellington and were greeted by the superintendent of the Wellington province, Isaac Featherston, and Walter Buller, accommodated at Auckland House and had meetings with all sorts of experts on all sorts of things. And after a week of doing all those things, they went up to Wanganui by horseback, and Featherston and Buller were going with them. And the reason they were going towards Wanganui was that Wanganui had lobbied quite heavily to be considered as being somewhere on Cook Strait, and why would we not be suitable as government seat? And so so they went, reached Otaki the next day, where they were very impressed by the Rangiatea church, which burned down in the 1990s. The day after, they reached the Manawatu River, and that was the point of Featherston and Buller travelling with the commissioners. They were there to buy land from Maori in the Manawatu, and at £12,000 at that point in time, that was the single largest payment for Maori land, and they were accompanied by an interpreter and 12 mounted native police. So here was Featherston basically impressing the commissioners with, look how we've got it under control, that if we want, we just buy huge chunks of land for Maori, and it's just not a problem. So anyway, so the Manawatu was in flood. The commissioners didn't go up the Manawatu River. They headed off to Wanganui, where they were shortly after reached by the steamer Rangatira, and I'll show you why that was of importance. And then they had a bit of a pleasure trip up the Wanganui River, and in Wanganui they had a huge number of official delegations Sir Francis Murphy went back to Wellington by himself. He fell sick, so the Rangatira shipped him down and went back up, and by the time it went back up, Featherston and Buller had reached Wanganui as well, and then they spent a bit of time up the river. They had 5 days with Maori on the river, sleeping at various marae, and 23 Kingites took their oath of allegiance to the crown in front of the 2 commissioners who had remained, so that was all very impressive. So the Rangatira, that was a private schooner, 217 tons, only 1 year old at the time, and so the government had hired the boat, and it was overhauled in Auckland before it was sent down to Wanganui. It was cleaned and painted from scratch to be as presentable as possible. So the Rangatira eventually left Wanganui, and the 2 commissioners and Featherston and Buller went back to Wellington, where they met more officials, visited the hut, Ributaka, and then a few days later they went across to Picton. It took them a day to get there, and it was raining quite heavily. In fact, the whole time they were in Marlborough, it was raining either a little or heaps. And so when, for example, the Marlborough superintendent, Arthur Seymour, came to the ship to greet them, they had arranged dinner on shore, and they didn't want to get wet, so they had dinner on the Rangatira instead. So they had a very large long trek through Marlborough, went to the Awatere Valley, the Wairau Valley, Blenheim, hit some flooding, and Docker nearly lost his life crossing the Omaka River. He was following Arthur Seymour by horse a few feet downstream, and the horse tripped into a hole and fell over backwards, and his knee was crushed, and Seymour just got hold of him and dragged Docker back onto land, otherwise we would have lost one of the commissioners there. So it was all very dramatic. So eventually they came back to Picton and then went across by Rangatira to Havelock. And about the Havelock visit, there's a so they had some good experiences. You know, they were apparently impressed by the lush lands, you know, as much as they could see during the rain. But anyway, so they went to Havelock, and a local journalist reported back to his newspaper, "The commissioners walked through the town and after partaking of some refreshment returned to the steamer which got underway the same day. I should hardly think their opinion of Havelock to be very lively. The streets are ankle deep with mud, and the tide happening to be very low, they must have abandoned any idea, if it ever existed, of Havelock being chosen as the seat of government." So that was that. So then we come to Nelson. And what happened there is there was a pre-arranged arrival procedure with the Rangatira firing 2 shots and then 2 shots coming from the shore, and so all the locals knew about the commissioners are arriving, and so here is an example of what they were up to. Yesterday they were employed in examining several of the government officials, including the provincial secretary, the provincial engineer, the surveyor, and the colliery engineer, on various subjects bearing upon the adaptability of the city for the future seat of government. We understand that amongst those subjects upon which the commissioners appear to lay most stress were the present harbourage and the possibility of extending it, the quantity of land still available for settlement in the province, the present areas of the city and the facilities for increasing it, its drainage and sewerage, the visitations of earthquake to which it has been subjected, and the general capabilities of the place, including manufactures of bricks, etc., etc.
Pushing the table.
Oh, Jeez, I'm getting a bit too excited here.
Too excited.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry for that. So after a few days, the commissioner went back onto the boat to explore Tasman Bay and Golden Bay. So one afternoon they sailed to Crozill Harbour, which is just north of Nelson, and potted through that harbour there, and were very impressed. And later that day went over to Collingwood, arrived there late in the evening, dropped anchor, and then first thing the next morning, 6:30 a.m., the commissioners went on land, had a look around for 3 hours, and went back onto the boat. And the Rangatira then went to Taranui, Estrella, Broadstead, and Kai Territory, and they all only looked at it from the boat, and then back to Nelson that evening. So spent more time in Nelson, and then the plan was to ride to Downard-Wilke and check it out by horseback. But again, we had some flooding, so they rode to Fox Hill instead. Only 2 of them, because Docker Mrs. Bumney, he didn't want to sit on a horse. So after that, the commissioners wrote their report. Took them a day apparently, and on 1 October the report was finished and in a sealed envelope, and so they handed that to the Superintendent Robinson to be forwarded to Governor Gray, and their report was published in the newspapers starting on 18 October. And I have the report here. It's exactly 2 pages. It's not very long, so you can have a quick squiz. What it says, so on the 2 pages they describe the criteria that they used for evaluating the various places. They list all the places that they examined, and then they have one paragraph for summing up and coming up with their recommendation, which is: having thus made themselves acquainted as far as was practicable with the character and capabilities of both shores of Cook Strait, the commissioners have arrived at the unanimous conclusion that Wellington in Port Nicholson is the site upon the shores of Cook Strait which presents the greatest advantages for the administration of the government of the colony. And that was it. That was all that happened. Right, so this is all the facts, and now here is my quick assessment of it all, what it all means. This is not based on reliable sources, this is what I take from it. So here's a list of the criteria that the commissioners used, and I tried to come up with how they would have rated Wellington, Nelson, and Collingwood, and so it's entirely subjective because they did not record that. So the first part is a central position, and so Wellington was regarded as the most central, and Nelson and Collingwood are a little bit harder to get to. You know, it takes a few hours more by boat, although the Nelsonians argued quite hard that at the time 2/3 of the European New Zealand population were living in the South Island, and in 1862 Christchurch had started building telegraph lines. You know, the first line was from Christchurch to Lyttelton, and so that was working its way up the country, that Nelson would soon be able to communicate by telegraph with 2/3 of the European population. So even though it takes a bit longer to get to Nelson compared to Wellington, we can actually get to the population quicker because we have telegraph, and at the time an undersea cable connecting the South and North Island was totally not affordable. So the next point is harbour. Wellington beats Nelson by quite some margin, and Collingwood, this is what, if anything, this sunk Collingwood. So the Collingwood harbour could accommodate ships of up to 80 tons. So the Rangatira was 217 tons or so. So the commissioners had to be rowed ashore there was no possibility of actually doing something with the Collingwood harbour, so that really sunk our chances of getting the capital. Or maybe it's good, I don't know. So land capabilities, I would think that that Collingwood was ahead in terms of available land for expansion compared to Wellington and Nelson. However, the Wellingtonians, as I said, they really made a fuss about this, and so maybe they gave them the impression it's really easy to sort this out. And even if Collingwood had an advantage, I'm not sure that the commissioners would have known about it because nobody told them. In terms of resources, timber, minerals, especially mineral resources, Collingwood was ahead of the other places. Defense capability, so this is mainly naval defense. The Wellington harbour is a lot easier to defend because of the narrow entrance, so big tick for them. And natural disadvantages, earthquakes, well, only Wellington had an earthquake at that point in time, so that was their big disadvantage. And the Nelsonians, they were certainly pushing the natural advantage of their weather, this little book here is New Zealand as It Might Have Been by Stephen Levine. So he wrote a few chapters on what could have happened if big historical decisions would have gone in a different way, and he's written a chapter in here from the perspective of Helen Clark. So the book was published in 2006 after Nelson had become the capital. And so here Helen Clark is musing. She could imagine what it might have been like trying to govern in Wellington, or they'd come into the chamber and sit there shouting at each other, the wind howling outside and the members howling at one another inside. What a circus! She shook her head. Even calm and easygoing people like herself could lose their head in a place like that. She remembered how good-tempered Jim Bolger had been. He was someone you could sit down and have a drink with. In the chamber he was just as courteous as he could be. But that was Nelson for you. It brought out the best in you. She could imagine that in Wellington they'd have sat across from each other, neither of them really wanting to be there, and one day they'd become so irritable towards one another he'd possibly throw something at her. She could see the headlines in the Nelson paper. Bolger throws pen in Parliament, Clark unharmed. It would be ludicrous. What kind of example would they be setting to the young people of the country? You didn't have to be an opera fan to realize that happy politicians were apt to be able to work together more intelligently, able to produce better laws than unhappy ones. And if you have forgotten what happened in 1998, Jim Bolger threw a pen in Parliament. So, there were some secondary factors which the commissioners were not directly assessing, but they were certainly making a difference. There was very heavy lobby in Wellington and Nelson. There was absolutely zero lobbying in or for Collingwood. The Manawatu land purchase that that overcame the perception that there isn't enough land available. The Maori interactions in Wanganui, the land wars were underway, and so Featherston really demonstrated that we can get on with Maori and we get some of them onto our side, and it's all tickety-boo. The stately provincial council buildings that they had built in Wellington in 57, 58, and when you just look at the time spent in various places, that then expresses itself how these secondary factors maybe had a bearing. So there were a few, count the trip, the 3 days traveling towards the Manawatu, then Wellington had 18 days of the commissioner's time. Wanganui got a surprising 16, some of that only with 2 commissioners. Nelson had 9 days, and Collingwood and Havelock had a few hours each. So yeah, so clearly Wellington had put itself into a better position than Nelson when it comes to these secondary factors. And all the contemporary newspaper reporting at the time, they all agreed that the decision would be made between Wellington and Nelson. So yeah, so the words that are supplied advertising this talk said, how close did Collingwood get to in the Commissioners' deliberations to instead become New Zealand's capital? Much closer than you might think. So that's what I said, and then I did the work. And despite meeting the criteria quite well, the lack of a harbour really sunk Collingwood's chances to ever be considered. But the other issue that undid the town was that exactly nobody put any effort into promoting Collingwood to the commissioners. Hence, the capital was never going to move here. Thank you. And my apologies, that is a little longer than 14 minutes.
Actually, when you were describing the Commissioners' journeys around this part of the country, you didn't mention the Takaka Valley. Did they not look in here at all?
No. They landed in Collingwood, spent 3 hours ashore, and then went down the coast, keeping close to the coast, you know, around separation point, keeping, you know, having a look at Totranui, but they did not come. In Golden Bay, they only came ashore in Collingwood for 3 hours.
It seems a strange oversight.
Maybe, yeah.
I'm not suggesting Takaka should be the capital, but there's all this land in the valley.
Yeah, Takaka was, I mean, the way I have described Collingwood, you know, it was a boom and bust town. And by the time the commissioners came, was certainly more bust than anything else, but it was still a lot more important at the time than Takaka had been at that point. So yeah, Takaka hadn't really got going. John?
I'm surprised that Auckland somehow was too far north, I guess.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, that's the big grumbles. Kate?
This is a men's story, isn't it? There are no women mentioned anywhere.
Oh yeah.
And that's half the population is women. And so the male population has taken over everything.
That's right, that's exactly right. Women just didn't have a role in those things at that time whatsoever, you know.
And it's very striking looking at all the people you're talking about.
We had to wait for another few decades because before Kate Shepherd made some inroads on that front. But that was the first country in the world where the women got the vote. So,
yes, that's true.
So let's not forget that. Karen?
Women had a role of producing the men.
That's right, and turning them into strapping lads. Yes, exactly. That was, and cooking. And washing.
And washing.
Yes.
So how many days did the commissioners get their $2,000 a day?
I did see the total expenditure for the commissioners was just over £4,000. That would have included all their expenses as well, and you know, hiring a reasonably big ship for a couple of months, that wouldn't have come cheap either. So I'm guessing that the commissioners were paid the moment they got into Auckland, and they were paid until the day on 3 October when they left Nelson.
Was Picton ever considered at all, or was it too small at that time?
They looked at that, and they actually spent a lot of time in Marlborough, but you know, their experience was Docker nearly drowning. I'm not sure. they got too good an impression of Picton. The other thing that I didn't even touch on is that Marlborough has a really complicated history. The provincial council, they were infighting. As I said, Seymour had just become superintendent just a few days before the commissioners arrived, and so Seymour, for example, he shifted the capital of Marlborough province from Picton to Blenheim. So that was what the fuss in Marlborough was all about. You know, which place should be the capital of the province? You know, they were spending so much energy on that. So I can't imagine that wouldn't have rubbed off onto the commissioners in some form or shape as well. So yeah, no, I don't think they were seriously considered for that reason.
And so just another question, were they given a list of places they should consider, or did they kind of work it out themselves where they should go?
Yeah, it's a shame that, as I said, when they were in Auckland, they were actually in the capital, and I'm dead sure they would have met with George Gray, and there's just no reporting of that, and nothing in the parliamentary papers about that either. So I'm not sure how much of an instruction they were given, and it was interesting that in their report, the two-page report that's going around, they actually outlined the criteria that they had used. It was written like nobody actually told them what to do or how to go about that. So it seems to me like their brief was, find us a suitable place somewhere on Cook Strait, and that was it. So that is the impression that I got from spending a few weeks worth of reading about this. Yeah, it's very surprising. It's quite a, but then again, you know, it was a deliberate decision, and it was so controversial with New Zealand that the New Zealanders, you know, after a decade of fighting over this question in Parliament, they just couldn't resolve it, and they resolved it has to be resolved by some other parties, people who haven't got a predetermined mind on the matter, who are totally impartial, which is why Australians were called in. So was it generally known that 3 Australians made the decision? That there you go. So you've learned something. That's good. Some of you.
Do you know who owned the Rangatira?
Yes, the New Zealand Steam Shipping Company was a private company.
It was a company.
Yeah, it was a private company. Yeah. So it was hired from one of the early shipping owners. Yeah.
I believe that the big thing that really turned the tables on Collingwood was that find way south of gold, more gold, much more gold. All the mines just up and left overnight in Collingwood.
Yeah, they other. You know, it emptied out when the West Coast gold rush started. That's when many of them just disappeared, and then nothing much happened until in the 1890s, when the big money moved in, and industrial type gold mining started. Yeah, but that's a talk for another day, I suppose.
Axel, do you want to put a plug in for your new U3A group and Wikipedia?
Yes, I can. So 4 of us had one meeting, and we looked through a long list of potential topics that we could research as a group. And so the intention is, once we have found out what happened, that we would turn that newfound knowledge with all its reliable sources and turn that material into Wikipedia pages, and either improve existing Wikipedia pages or write completely new ones. So, for example, how come that the cement works don't have a Wikipedia page, and they are such a you know, important part of Golden Bay history. So you know, we're going to sort this out. So we meet once a month, and certainly, you know, if you've got a laptop and an inquisitive mind, you can learn what it takes to turn that curiosity into knowledge that everyone can read.
So, are you talking about Wikipedia pages for the whole of Golden Bay? Is that what you're...
So the scope is Golden Bay history. So rather than New Zealand history, we want to focus on what happened here locally. Have I gone off again?
Yeah, it's cut out again.
Oh dear. There we go. I'm on again. So yeah, we, because it's, to us it's more interesting, and you know, I produced a draft list of potential topics, and it's longer than my arm, so there's heaps to do, you know. Solly's, for example. Solly's a big company.
Sorry. How many pages are there at the moment?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, no.
Oh, no idea. But you know, yeah.
Are there any more questions? If not, I'm coming up to say thank you.
Oh, thank you, Liz.
Not trying, I mean, if anything, another question, just please ask. Right. Okay. Axel, not stand there. Oh. Axel being quite a close
We might as well stay so that you see. I'm recording this because I've been asked by some people, oh, we would love to be there, but we are away. Can you record it somehow?
You could use some microphones here.
You think I haven't got a loud enough voice, right? That's okay, I've been a school teacher. Okay. Okay. Is that all right? Being a fairly close neighbour of Axel's, and having known Axel since 2005 or 6, maybe 5. Yeah, when he was a bicycle advocate, and I was a pedestrian advocate in Wellington. Anyway, I've known him for quite a while. What was I going to say then? That was excellent. You've done so much research. You know, you've got all those amazing books, and I've no doubt you've talked to local people that have been around for a while, e.g. the Washburns, who were some of the first, one of the first families in the area. And I really like the way you synthesised it all, so it's there in one place now. We can all go off and look up things. I've just got to read my notes, I can't read my handwriting. And I love the way you did the state of government there. That's amazing, being a sort of political person sometimes. I love the way that you put it all together. And the fact that the commissioners were Australian, I mean, really, we wouldn't allow that today, but they did then because, you know, maybe they were busy doing other things. And one thing I loved was a little story about them from that book, what's it called? New Zealand, How It Could Have Been. And the incident, well, that Helen Clark describes of the pen being thrown by Bolger, and it got me musing as I sat there. Wasn't there as much fuss made of that as there was of Julianne Genter nearly hitting somebody with a report in Parliament recently? Maybe that's more of an offence these days. Anyway, okay. It's wonderful what you're doing on Wikipedia. I mean, this is the new way of doing things, you know. Some of us think, oh God, that's, you know, way out. But can anybody edit Wikipedia or go and make comments of what?
Anyone can edit Wikipedia, yes, that is correct. You don't even have to have an account. However, it is a lot easier if you don't know what you're doing, if you're doing it with an account, because then somebody can come along and say, hey, thanks for your attempt, it wasn't quite right. What you did wrong is such and such, and what you should have done instead is this.
So you get feedback.
And so you can actually have a conversation with a newbie and be kind to them and give them some guidance. And because you think that Tasman District is a big bureaucracy, welcome to Wikipedia. Man, that is more bureaucratic than anything you've seen before. But anyone can edit it. And somehow it works, you know. It's this thing on the internet that in theory can't possibly work, and in practice it does.
But is it not the danger in these days of misinformation and disinformation getting put on? I would have thought so, but so I think you probably have to watch out a bit, do you?
Well, it's quite the opposite. It is the last sane place on the internet, because there's so strong processes that are in place that keep misinformation and disinformation out of Wikipedia. So it becomes a lot harder. It's easier for misinformation to infiltrate social media. And so, which is why Wikipedia actually becomes more important these days, because the strong processes that keep that out of that platform.
Yeah,
So,
well, I'm glad to hear you're going to do a whole lot of pages, and I am sure that you will police it very closely and not allow any misinformation and disinformation.
Not just me, it's a big editing community out there.
Yeah.
There is 480 active editors in New Zealand. I mean, it's always a way of how you measure that, but so, you know, this particular way of measuring, we have 480 active editors in New Zealand, so there's a lot of watching eyes, and 126,000 active editors worldwide that look after the English Wikipedia. So it's not an insignificant little...
No, and I'm sure some of them are interested enough in Collingwood and stuff to go and keep an eye on that. But I think it's wonderful because of your group, because I know that, for example, Piers has put something up there on the Millthorpe method. You wrote it though? Yeah, so it's great that you've formed this group and, you know, you're writing stuff and we can all go there and check and make sure you've got it right.
Yeah,
so.
And I mean, that's the thing, you know, you are all peer reviewers, and when you find something that isn't right, you know, there's an edit button or there's a talk page, and you can say, hey, I think that's not quite right. And then we have a talk about reliable sources. So this probably isn't a reliable source, because this is somebody making up history.
Oh well, never mind. And anyway, if anybody wants to go and edit it and they're not quite sure about the technology, come along to SeniorNet, we'll show you how to do it. Anyway, we'd really like to say thank you very much, Axel, for giving up your time and for telling us all about this new project, and for putting it down so well. And we'd like to just give you this as a token of our thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.